Because what you, the unsung heroes in the wastewater industry, do matters. Join me, Suzan Chin-Taylor, the DooDoo Diva, a longtime veteran of the wastewater, trenchless, and civil infrastructure industry each week as I deliver industry know-how from industry pros who know how. Whether you want to learn about the latest trends in technology, training and retaining great talent, sales and marketing, leadership and growth, or simply how to be more efficient, productive, or profitable, this podcast is for you. Let's dive in.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the DooDoo Divas Smells Like Money podcast. Today, we are visiting with Andy Zetlan, and he sits in kind of an unusual position and has a very unique background as it relates to the utility industry. And so I don't want to botch this because we're going to be dealing with maybe a sensitive topic that we're kicking that can down the road, but I think we've gotten to the point where we can't kick it down there any further. And a lot of, the moratoriums that are coming down are going to be, we think it's a long way away, but it's going to be here sooner than we know it, because I know I'm finding the older I get, time is like melting snow. It passes so very quickly. And so with that, Andy, welcome to the show. And I'd like you to just share with the audience a little bit about your background and how it relates to the wastewater industry or utilities in general for our, these vital resources that we rely on just to sustain our life.
Understand. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. It's a real pleasure to have this conversation, and I hope it's helpful to those who are listening. My background is 50 years or roughly in the utility industry. As a matter of fact, some of my colleagues call me Doug, which, even though my name is Andy, but Doug, as you probably know, stands for dumb old utility guy. And I have worked directly for electric and gas utilities. And as a consultant, I've worked for many electric and gas utilities, but also water, wastewater, occasional solid waste removal organization, not just in the United States, but around the world. So I've had a very, very enjoyable career, and I've gotten to see both sides, what challenges utilities and what challenges the consumers are facing, and how things might grow in the future. Because the future is right now a little hazy as to where everything is going.
And that leads us into the topic we're going to be discussing today, which is a couple things. Carbon neutrality. It's the big buzzword out there, green, sustainability, yada, 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 and how that all ties into, reliability. And some of the things that you mentioned before we came on the show was that many of these things or these mandates may not apply to you as a city. It depends on, as Andy was telling me, where you're located, what your constituents or your ratepayers are looking to have. And so with that, I'm going to open that up to you, Andy, to explain how this whole concept, I don't want to say concept, but how this whole push for carbon neutrality and moving away from fossil fuel to power our lift station, our conveyance systems, lift stations, and these treatment plants, and what that is going to mean to treatment plants and and whoever's managing these utilities, and what they're going to have to be prepared for, what some of their deadlines might be, as well as, okay, we don't want to wait until the last minute to get started on this because we know we have to do it. What are some of the key things that they can start thinking about or working on right now so they're not going to find themselves in a terrible bind or in a panic when push comes to shove? And so with that, I'm going to just, let you lay the framework and the groundwork and share your words of wisdom of what people need to be looking forward to or looking to do regarding this carbon neutrality.
Sure. That sounds fine. And again, thanks for having me. So most of you probably know that there's an upheaval in the electricity utility system,
Mm-hmm.
and it's happening in a few areas. The first is, as Susan mentioned, it's the idea of getting fewer fossil fuels, moving to carbon neutrality over the years, shutting off coal and gas-fired power plants in favor of other kinds of sources of generation, which are generally considered greener, such as solar and wind and hydro. But as that's going on, keeping in balance the loss of certain generation. And at the same time, there's been an unusually high growth in the consumption of electricity. It's all happening at the same time. We're having to shut down some plants. And at the same time, people's homes are becoming more electrified. People's businesses are being more electrified. If you run wastewater stations, you're one of the biggest consumers of electricity there is. You've got heavy machinery, and it's almost always on. And you're part of all of this issue as growth in consumption occurs, and we are transitioning to new forms of power generation. It's likely that you're going to see some reliability issues. And if there's any industry that is sensitive to reliability issues, it is yours. And that includes both plants and the delivery systems that you use, because they're generally using electric pumping stations. So we have a situation where at the same time, the electric utility system is trying to reform itself and take advantage of government programs and so forth to ease the burden of the divide on the use of fossil fuels and so forth. It could, depending on where you live, and the growth of use of electricity at the same time, you could be seeing some more changes to the ability of a utility to be as reliable as it has been in the past. Now, you may have backup generators, and I assume most of you do. But again, depending on where you live, that's likely a diesel generator, fossil fuel. Your citizens may not be happy to see it running quite a bit. And again, if you live in certain parts of the United States versus others, that may be a problem for you, it may not be. But either way, it's bound to be costly to you as reliability shrinks a little bit. And we're trying to be very forward thinking on how all this might work and how it might affect you. At the same time, because coal was relatively inexpensive and some of its replacements are not, the cost is going up, and that's affecting you as well. And even though you might have industrial rates, they're bound to grow in the near term because the pressure on retail rates, homeowners, small businesses, is high, and the electric rates are growing nationwide as a result. And again, areas of big cities are growing faster than areas in the middle of the country, but they're still growing. Electric vehicles are on their way in, more and more home appliances and electrification going on. It's just a serious issue. So you have the cost going up, reliability potentially being affected, and you have this critical view, again, depending on where you live, of the impact on our environment. And it's a serious issue. And we know that failure of your electricity systems, from a reliability point of view, may cost you in just your backup generation and wear and tear on a diesel, generator, fuel, and so forth that you hadn't planned to use. Or it may cost you, if you run out of fuel or you don't have sufficient backup and you haven't backed up your delivery systems, it may cause you spills, which are painful both from a physical point of view, cleanups, and from the level of fines that could be assessed. So there are challenges coming down the road. And it's not just your industry, it's most industries. Industries that take care of people or have the responsibility for people, like colleges, universities, large office complexes, hospitals, also are finding it necessary to plan for less reliability, to figure out how to curb their costs, and are doing so quite quickly. Although today, since each state basically runs its own regulatory environment, each state might have rules on how you can do that. But as a water wastewater enterprise that's dependent on electricity, it behooves you to think through, I think, all of these issues, because as you capital plan your future, you need to know not only if you need to make investments on your electric system, or whether you need to build your own electric system to run your own plants and not rely on the utility as much to ensure your own reliability. That makes sense.
Yes, it does. And there are new technologies coming to the forefront about that are actually, harnessing the energy that the plant produces itself. It's just a natural byproduct of what it does,
That's
from
right.
the heat, to turn that into fuel that can run the plant. And
That's right.
so where are some of the areas, you're talking about this movement to carbon neutral, that the utilities may not be able to give us what, we've always been used to receiving at the level we've been used to receiving it. I often think about, okay, this is great that we've got all these electric vehicles. And yes, it's putting out less, I guess, the fumes or whatever, the emissions from the vehicles. But wait a minute. We still need to generate the power to fuel the electric vehicles. And so how is that power being generated? And you were saying about like the alternatives, but there's still fossil fuels. So the more that we move into some of these, it's almost like you're solving one problem, but yet you may be creating a whole nother that you didn't realize that you were going to create.
Yep, the famous law of unintended consequences. But
Yes.
I will say that the electric system as a whole is the famous elephant. And honestly, you do have to, eat the elephant like everybody else, one bite at a time.
Yeah, we don't want to create total widespread panic on this, that, oh my gosh, tomorrow, the electric plant isn't going to be able to give me my energy anymore. But again, as you were saying, to take those steps, what are some of the things that you see in the planning stages that people can start with now? Because, not that you're, the great Karnak, where you can, project when this is all going to happen. Mm-hmm. But what are some of the things that they can do right now on a small scale to start planning to, I want to say, hedge your bets, mm-hmm. have kind of that insurance policy internally to give them a little comfort at night?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I hope you have good relationships with your electric utilities.
Yeah, I'm sure
they may be
do.
Some do, some don't. You'd be surprised.
Really?
Some are part of the same municipal enterprise, and some are investor-owned utilities.
Oh.
And let's just say that investor-owned utilities, marketing and customer relationships aren't always their best talent.
Okay.
But again, depends where you live and what your relationships are. What you want to do is think through the what ifs. It's a risk management proposition. Part of the risk is the utility is going to raise the price. It's not
Right.
just how much, but it's when and how much. And utilities depend on large consumers of electricity like yourselves to have what is called base load. In other words, they expect this all the time. But if they're running out of electricity, or if a power plant fails somewhere, again, the risk management, what is their guarantee, if they're willing to give a guarantee, of reliability? Is it 99%? Is it 99.8%? Is it 99.85%? If you run a hospital, you need virtually 100%. You need, and the way the industry looks at it is 5 nines, 99.999% reliability. And they build usually for the other 0.001%. Perhaps your utility is at 98.5 and you build for the other 1.5.
Okay.
But you have to figure out what that 1.5 is. Does it mean the worst, your risk, if you were down due to a weather event, the utility was down for a week or 2 weeks? Can you survive that? What happens to your systems in such situations? How do you react to it? And indeed, if they say, well, we're currently, this is what it's been, and you'll say to them, well, the weather isn't getting better. It's actually getting much more severe. What can you tell us? What can you guarantee us? What if this happens? What if this happens? How do you, Mr. Utility, react? What can we count on? And then you can look at an investment you've already made and say, well, we can run that for 48 hours, no problem. But 72 is a stretch, and a week is unheard of. What do we do in these situations? So you can add to your, from a capital expense, you can add to your backup systems. And there are some cities that are taking on what's called the creation of microgrids, which is generally it's actually a grid on your own. So you may produce some electricity. You may, using the geography you have, put up solar panels. You may put up windmills. You may put in battery banks. And you may include whatever generator you've already spent money on. And together with a computer system that runs all of that, and they do exist, you can guarantee yourself maybe 4 nines of reliability. And at the same time, maybe reduce the amount that you have to pay your local utility. And of course, not good for the local utility, but good for you, perhaps, in terms of ameliorating rate increases and so forth. So it's a matter of risk assessment, cost benefit. And I know that typically you do big block investments from time to time. And so this is just another aspect of those investments. If you put in extra capacity and it's due in 2028, perhaps you'll take that time while you're installing all that and building all that to build out additional electricity functionality, whether it be a microgrid or additional backup systems, or just simply having the ability, because your costs are going up, to reduce your costs by generating your own. Invest in, like a homeowner would, invest in solar panels, invest in windmills, and utilize the heat to perhaps turn a turbine and power up a battery bank. At the same time, if you do that, you can have all your employees plug their cars in and trucks in, their electric vehicle cars and trucks, and have your employees, instead of charging their vehicles at home, you can charge it at the office, so to speak, and that might be helpful. And again, you have to measure the pushback from citizens that you serve on your
Right.
ability to continue running things like diesel engines. There are some countries that, they're so non-reliable that they've got diesel engines all over the country. And as a result, the air can't be breathed. It's a really difficult situation. Their fossil fuel isn't as much the electric system as it is people who have put in their own diesel generators in case the electric system doesn't work. It's the knee-jerk reaction to the lack of reliability.
Right. Wow. A lot to think about. We didn't want to scare people, but it's just taking those preventive measures up front. Now, I love the idea of, okay, you're going to be making some upgrades or some improvements at the plant. Add this in at the same time. Take care of it all at once. It's a really great way to think about it. And so, Andy, for those who might be interested in maybe having a dialogue with you about more on this subject, because I understand you do some consulting, how can they get in touch with you?
Easily. I'm obviously on LinkedIn. I have retired from my full-time work that kept me busy for half a century. God, that sounds awful.
It's okay.
But I can be reached at my email, azetlan@yahoo.com, and it's Zetlan, or at 408-391-3851. And even though that's a West Coast area code, I have relocated and now live on Cape Cod in Massachusetts.
So you get to enjoy some lovely, cool weather in the summertime.
I do, but I also have to tell you, it gets very windy here. And as a result, I myself have a backup generator.
Oh, for
my home. Right.
Okay.
And my neighbors, many of whom, a lot of people come to Cape Cod to retire. I came to Cape Cod to work. Apparently, it doesn't seem to fit well. But my neighbors all know that I have the backup generator. So if in the winter, we've had storms, we've had outages of 36 to 48 hours.
Wow.
And I don't want to, no more. I don't want to do that anymore.
Right. Well, Andy, again, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Hope you got something out of this, got some good food for thought as we work towards doing something good for the planet and preparing for this new paradigm of carbon neutrality. And thank you again. And until next time, keep it flowing.
Be sure to subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you're an industry expert and would like to be considered as a guest on the show, click the Be a Podcast guest link below in the show notes for more information. Thanks again for joining me, the DooDoo Diva, on this week's episode of the Smells Like Money podcast.